Welcome back, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here for today's explainer. Today, we're going to structure and decode some truly fascinating source material all about the astrological and psychological underpinnings of relationship dynamics, conflict, and compatibility. If you've ever found yourself wondering why we connect, clash, and ultimately evolve through our partnerships, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to break down these cosmic mechanics step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to take a second and reflect on an intense relationship you've witnessed, or, maybe even experienced yourself. You know the kind, the ones that start with this magnetic pull that feels absolutely fateful, like pure destiny, but eventually they turn into a grinding, exhausting collision. So what is actually happening beneath the surface there? Today, we're looking at the high-stakes, karmic relationship material that explains exactly why this happens and how these intense connections are actually designed to serve our deepest personal growth. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll explore the me versus the we. Then we'll look at Mars as your relational asserter, break down elemental conflict styles, unravel the karmic knot of the nodes, and finally, demystify the Mongol dosha. Section 1. The me versus the we. Let's start right at the fundamental polarity of human connection.
And this brilliantly illustrates the foundation of it all. Think of the first house energy of Aries. This is the ultimate I am. It's the instinct of self-preservation, that raw spark of life that blazes a solo trail regardless of outside feedback. But then, opposing it, we have the seventh house energy of Libra. This is the we are. It's the natural diplomat, constantly making these little micro-adjustments to ensure union, harmony, and fairness. What we are really looking at here is a cosmic tug-of-war between raw autonomy and endless accommodation. Every single relationship has to navigate this exact tightrope.
Now let's add a spark to that tinderbox. In Vedic astrology, Rahu and Ketu are the north and south shadow planets. They represent our obsessive desires and our deepest phobias carried over from past lives. When these shadow planets fall across that Aries Libra axis we just talked about, they trigger a profound and honestly almost unavoidable tension between our need for individual survival and our craving for the sanctity of a partnership. It is the ultimate push and pull. Section 2. Mars, your relational asserter. So how does that underlying tension actually play out when boundaries get crossed? Well, enter Mars. Mars is essentially the commander-in-chief of the celestial cabinet. In relationship astrology, Mars governs far more than just overt, screaming arguments. It reveals how we mobilize energy in the face of opposition. It shows how we assert our core needs, how we respond to perceived unfairness, and fundamentally, how we feel about fighting to protect our own autonomy. It's the active, protective heat of the relationship.
But listen, raw heat without a container is just a forest fire, right? While Mars provides the fiery push to assert what matters, Saturn provides the structural framework and boundary setting to contain it. I want you to reflect on your own patterns for a moment. Healthy relationship conflict absolutely requires both. You need the push of Mars to prevent intimacy from devolving into resentful accommodation, but you need the agreed-upon limits of Saturn so that the conflict actually builds the relationship up rather than burning it straight to the ground.
Moving right along to Section 3, Elemental Styles of Conflict. Let's see how this builds into psychological profiles.
Now, what's really interesting about this matrix is how our elemental placements dictate our specific fighting styles. If your Mars is in fire, you're a direct confronter. You're transparent, but man, you might escalate things a bit too quickly. Earth Mars, you're the steady asserter. Very patient, but suppressed frustration can build into a massive eruption. Air Mars is the strategic negotiator. You're incredibly objective, but your partner might feel you're intellectually dismissing their feelings. And Water Mars is the emotional strategist. You have deep emotional awareness, but a tendency to be indirect can leave major issues totally unresolved. So ask yourself, do you charge in like fire, wait like earth, analyze like air, or retreat like water? Nailing this down is an absolute game changer for constructive engagement.
Section 4. The karmic knot of nodes. Let's shift from how we fight to the deep karmic why we fight.
This brings us to what's called a nodal swap, or reverse synastry. This is a highly volatile configuration where person A is moving toward a future destiny, their Rahu, that person B is desperately trying to purge and leave behind, their Ketu. It creates a completely closed loop of energy. This sparks an incredibly powerful initial magnetism that feels like, it feels like destiny. But make no mistake, it is actually a collision of two opposing spiritual trajectories. When this happens, it can trigger what is known as a sarpa dosha, which is essentially a karmic knot. This isn't a relationship born of some light, breezy choice. It is a relationship of sheer compulsion. The souls are forced into a mirror dance to settle an ancient past life account. This alignment brings old power dynamics, things like manipulation, betrayal, or a history of being completely swallowed up by others, into stark, high definition in this lifetime. It literally forces both partners to face their own hidden, selfish wiring.
The failure of the relationship is actually its success. Let that profound reframing sink in for a moment. These karmic collisions naturally exhaust themselves and dissolve because they were built on repayment, not creation. Once the Rahu of one person has pulled the necessary lessons from the Ketu of the other, the debt is paid. The spiritual contract is voided. The relationship ending isn't a tragic failure at all. It's the manifestation of the soul finally achieving freedom.
And that brings us to Section 5, Demystifying the Mongol Dosha.
Let's subjectively decode one of the most feared concepts in Vedic astrology. Mongol dosha is simply a structural planetary pattern. It absolutely does not mean you are cursed, and it is not a fear-based diagnosis of marital doom. As an explainer, we look at the facts of the source material. This simply means Mars is placed in a way that injects a highly competitive, fiery energy into the houses associated with marriage. Because of that heat, the relationship just requires conscious cultivation of energy management and temperament balance.
There are 6 specific trigger zones for this dosha. If Mars sits in the 1st house of self, the 2nd house of family, the 4th house of home, the 7th house of partnerships, the 8th house of longevity, or the 12th house of mental stress, it creates this dosha. Mars has a cruel, soldier-like nature. When that intense soldier energy sits in these sensitive domestic areas, it can manifest as a high or low-intensity kuja dosha. That can cause discord, make a person hot-tempered, or sometimes naturally delay marriage until the person matures a bit.
But there are very practical, actionable remedies for this. Beyond conscious partnership work and worshiping Lord Hanuman, the text outlines specific practices like the Kumbh Viva. Yes, this is a ceremonial ritual where the person with the dosha literally marries a peepal tree, a banana tree, or even a silver coin before they marry their human partner. As unconventional as a banana tree wedding sounds, the psychological logic is absolutely brilliant. The object harmlessly absorbs that initial aggressive burst of Mars energy, settling the karmic disruption so the actual marriage can thrive in peace.
So the crucial point is that context in astrology is everything. A poorly placed Mars might cause friction, sure, but if Mars sits in the 1st house in its own sign or its exalted sign, it creates what is called Aruchika yoga. This is a great person yoga. It actually softens the negative dosha effects and instead produces exceptional courage, natural leadership, and tremendous athletic and professional drive. That fiery Mars energy becomes a massive engine for life accomplishment.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Are your most exhausting relationship conflicts actually cosmic wake-up calls, pushing you to find your true center? Whether you view this through the ancient lens of karmic knots and doshas, or the modern psychological lens of conflict styles and mirroring, the ultimate takeaway is the exact same. The friction of relationships isn't a punishment, it is the universe's ultimate forge for our own individual evolution. Thank you so much for joining me to decode this incredible material. Take these frameworks, look at your own patterns, and keep learning.